Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga chapter review. This one's going to be for chapter 16, which is called The Singularity of Fate. So overall, I thought that this was a pretty good chapter. It was not maybe the chapter filled with the giant reveals that sometimes these volume ending chapters can be. They definitely avoided doing one of the very obvious things I think maybe we were expecting them to do here, that being the fact that there was actually, in terms of present day, there was no Boruto and there was no present day Kawaki. And so we didn't get the expected Kawaki confronting Amado situation. But instead, they did like the setup on pretty much like all the other sides of the stories, combined with a bit of backstory, which is quite interesting right at the start of the chapter, and they seem to have directly jumped in and just pretty clearly set up that we're straight back into the action. So any sense that we're pausing for a training arc or anything like that, no. The 8 pages at the start are kind of about the amount of pausing that we're doing for now. It looks like we're about to launch in with like chapter 17, 18, 19, 20, the next volume, to probably just do some big action fighting. Are we fully like everything's in motion now and like all the dominoes are going to fall and all the fights are going to start like at some point soon? Or are we actually spending time that like will somehow manage to take out one of these characters here over the next couple of chapters, but we're still here for the next 20 chapters or what? That's what's kind of hard to figure out. But I liked a lot of the character focus that we got here, and some of the kind of plot moments that did happen. Like, it was an eventful chapter, even if it maybe wasn't the most eventful chapter. So this is one I think we have to go through in detail here. So let's jump into the chapter. So Eida is on the cover page. Interestingly, there's also like an extra quote on the page here. It says, love looks not with the mind, but with the eyes, which is interesting given what they are at least partially focusing on with Eida, Sarada, and Sumire as characters, that being the kind of love dynamic, but we'll get there. Jumping into the chapter itself, we start with a full-on flashback sequence here. So we get like 8 pages of explanation here right at the start for, oh yeah, this is how Boruto's Flying Raijin Jutsu works. And so there's a few things that get confirmed here in that. One, Boruto calls it the Flying Raijin Jutsu, but it's technically not Minato's Flying Raijin Jutsu. They accomplish, in essence, the same thing, but Boruto did actually discover this by himself. The key kind of significance seemingly being here, the reason they're highlighting this, is that this is him learning to use part of his basic abilities as an Otsutsuki. So the idea that he can use space-time ninjutsu, he has manifested that effectively in the form of this jutsu that resembles the Flying Raijin Jutsu, but it does work slightly differently. Whereas Minato's version of the jutsu, he has to put a jutsu formula on something and then he can basically teleport to that location. Boruto has to mark metal objects with his chakra, and then he can transport to it. So it's slightly more limited on the marking situation. I suppose like this is where you get into the idea of like, I suppose to a certain degree that's like easy in that all he has to do is sort of like basically touch a metal object and it's marked, versus Minato always had to have the jutsu kind of formula on hand to attach onto something, but Boruto is limited by the fact that it has to be metal, whereas Minato just had to put it on something. So interesting. But yeah, we just get addressed here in the early pages that Boruto is considered a genius for kind of accomplishing this, obviously in the future, but we're bringing his techniques up ahead of time here. So we just get that explained. That yes, it's easier to do it quickly when stuff is within visual range, but you have to concentrate more for stuff that's further away. In terms of how do you address the difference between, say, oh, I have 2 shuriken in similar range, but they're in different locations. How do I know which one I'm going to arrive at? This is where Boruto comes up with the idea that this explains a few scenes from previous chapters in relation to this technique. He has little metal symbols that he marks, of course, and the symbol, of course, when he marks it, he can sense what shape it is at the very least. So he knows on the basis of the shape, sort of like what the distance is, where he's transporting to, that sort of thing. So it's a sort of clever situation there, and they seem to show us all the different shapes here. So I guess that's maybe a little bit of a teaser ahead of times of like, be on the lookout for little metal things kind of appearing in different panels, because he probably can transport to them, which is kind of cool. So that's that. And then it seems like we end this little sequence with the fact that he gets it right at the end there, because he is a genius. But this is obviously the very basic visual distance, but it seems like this is why he's able to very quickly master it. That a large part of the reason it took as many years as it did in one version of the timeline is just that it took a while to figure out some of these ideas, whereas right now, Kashin Koji is literally just saying, hey, here's what took you years to figure out. I've solved your problems for you. The actual jutsu itself is difficult. Oh, wait, no, you're a genius. You know what it is. So interesting stuff there. We then transition from the initial pages explaining Boruto's jutsu into further explanation on, hey, why don't we use your powers, Kashin Koji, in a very specific way? Why don't we just tell everyone? That way, everyone will be aware that, like, you have the powers to basically see the future, so everyone should join us, and that will help us go in a good direction, surely. Like, why do we have to keep it so secret? Major question. And Kashin Koji explains this very interesting concept here, that it's ironic and it feels like it's almost like backwards logic, but the more people, the more you know of a future, the more that future is sort of like likely to change, because if you are aware something is going to happen, you're going to act differently in the lead up and the time when that event actually happens. And so it's this thing where, like, it, to a certain degree, telling people about my ability almost negates the use of my ability. And I suppose it's worded pretty well here. For better or worse, to know the future leads to the act of destroying it. And this is where he points out this idea that himself, Kashin Koji, plus Boruto, but then also Eida, are viewed as being these singularities, that because they know stuff about the future, they're directly utilizing knowledge of the future to go down specific paths, sort of like ahead of times. They, effectively are limited in what they can do to a certain degree, because it sort of locks them into specific kind of like paths to a certain degree. Whereas to accomplish what they need to keep everyone else in the dark, so that as many pathways are open with other people as possible. That in a way, they're sacrificing how many options are open to them to guide everyone else's pathways in an interesting way. Kind of an interesting concept, kind of hard to explain, but I think I get the idea that they're kind of going for here. And of course, the reason Eida is included in this, as we see, is that she listens in on this conversation between Kashin Koji and Boruto. So because she is aware of at least a certain amount of, like, oh, Boruto can see the future, like, she is aware that Boruto learned a technique he would have in the future ahead of time. She also is now kind of like that, because her ability effectively allows her to see all conversations, and so she's aware of what stuff in the future has been said and not. It's an interesting one. What that's interesting kind of just by itself overall, by that they've sacrificed themselves in a future kind of capacity to guide everyone else along the right path is a very interesting concept. We then cut to where Eida actually is, obviously the kind of house they're staying in, and of course Sarada and Sumire are there. So Sarada especially really wants to know what's going on with Boruto. Eida basically just relays that Yeah, Boruto isn't saying much, he must have his reasons. It seems like he's doing it to prevent unnecessary danger to the two of you, and they both have a reaction to that. Where Sumire is more thoughtful about it, but Sarada is more like, hey, he's taking everything on by himself, like, we want to help, like, we should team up with him to make this happen. And then we get this interesting kind of turn in the conversation as Sumire kind of agrees with the sort of sentiment here, and it's sort of meant to be kind of proven correct here, because Eida can't explain the whole stuff about future kind of timelines, so she just had to say, like, I think he's keeping you out of the loop to protect you. And Sumire kind of latches onto that and is like, hey, yeah, we shouldn't know where Boruto is, because what she says here is, we may have taken Boruto's side outwardly, yet we know almost no crucial information about him. About him. But I think it's because of that we've been able to live freely like this. Now, I've seen some people interpret this, maybe this was just spoilers where we maybe didn't have the best translation. Some people interpret aspects of this as if, oh, when they say that, freely like this, what they mean is this is kind of confirmation of why they are immune to omnipotence. Whereas I think based on what Sumire says in the previous panel, it's more of, well, here's why we aren't thrown in with the kind of rogue ninja enemy to the village Boruto, even though we outwardly support him. It's ultimately because everyone knows we don't know anything about him, whereas if we did, if we were properly connected to him, we might not have the freedom to move around that we want. I'm not really sure we're directly addressing the omnipotence situation here, because she then goes on to say, so what I feel we ought to be doing is not to chase after Boruto overall. Sarada points out that, hey, in one situation, Boruto might have died if none of us were there. It's too reckless. But she points out, Sumire points out that, hey, what if he got hurt because we were there? What if the entire reason he could have got hurt, or even worse, is because he was jumping in to protect you? That sort of idea, that he's staying away from us because, the liability kind of point almost is being brought up to a certain degree here. Which, interestingly, they cut to Demon at this point. I get it. They're sort of, I guess, acknowledging he's in the room. You see him in other panels, but this one is directly, it's like a Demon panel. So I don't know if they're playing any sort of importance on that, but it's just interesting that, like, he looks over to Sarada when Sumire says this, which I'm guessing it's just a sense of, like, kind of, this is in a way sort of that challenge of, like, kind of Sarada, like, hey, you know, this sort of happened before. Whole reason, like, Boruto's been injured in the past, like the eye injury or whatever, is because of what happened. Like, you were there, and you are, like, this exact thing that she just says happened pre-time skip, basically. And she kind of points out, you might want to try putting yourself in Boruto's shoes. And Sarada's like, huh, what? Like, why am I being called out all of a sudden? And she says, do you really think he likes having to keep things from us? Has there ever been a moment where you've reflected on his pain? And Sarada's like, oh, like you're getting me thinking about things. But then she says, and not just Boruto's feelings, but mine too. You do know, don't you, that I like Boruto a lot. And yet you just leapt into his arms. And it's like, oh, wait, we're addressing this, okay. And it's like, okay, I get it. In the manga, where we don't actually have that much information on Sumire just from the manga. Obviously, we know more about her if you've seen the anime and you know more kind of specifics on her. But so far in the manga, this has been one of the main dynamics, is that she's been quite vocal about the fact that she likes Boruto. We obviously basically know Sarada likes him too, but she's more in the situation where she kind of hasn't admitted it to herself just yet. So one of them's being kind of completely open and honest about this, and one of them isn't quite. But then you, of course, see the idea of, hey, I've been sort of clear about this, and you kind of didn't think about that when you just ran up and like hugged him. And it's interesting because it's obviously a partial jealousy kind of going on here. And she says, I've tried to be respectful of your feelings to understand that your reaction in that moment was to be expected. But what about you? When you were in front of me, did you think about my feelings at all? Even just a little bit. That she's kind of pointing out that, hey, this is a little bit kind of imbalanced. I think we both know, we both like Boruto. I'm adjusting kind of the way I'm doing things to be aware of what you're doing, whereas it feels like you're just doing whatever and you're not acknowledging kind of that I'm kind of a factor in all of this. So sure, yes, it is partially Sumire's arc is focused on her love for Boruto, and that's a little bit kind of frustrating. But it is also bringing her into the spotlight. It is kind of highlighting this idea of, hey, is Sumire actually going to do anything in the manga? Does she have a role in the series apart from just we're bringing an anime character into the manga, or what? Because why was she included in the Omnipotence? Like, the series has so many characters. Like, you didn't have to do this, but they clearly did this for reasons. And it's obviously, yes, it's a kind of romance thing. It's a little bit of a jealousy kind of arc, but it is also challenging both characters to kind of evolve and grow a little bit. Even just the friendship kind of between the two of them as well. And it's interesting because like Eida's there. And her reaction here is hilarious because she's just like awkward. It's so tense. I'm afraid to even twitch. And yet this is crazy fun. Keep going. So she's loving this drama because she's getting to see kind of real kind of romance feelings kind of play out in front of her for kind of like the first time. Whereas I guess she's typically more used to seeing the romance kind of feelings that her abilities draw out of people, which aren't real. So that's an interesting angle on that. Sumire apologizes for bringing this up, especially at the time that it is, but then she runs off. And we get this interesting thing at the end here, which is Sarada stands up and is like, wait, class rep. But then Sumire pauses and is like, how much longer will I still just be class rep to you? And for like the third or fourth time in just a few pages, Sarada is just left kind of speechless by this calling out, by the kind of sudden like turn of emotions in the conversation. And Sumire does leave at this point. Very interesting as the scene kind of mostly ends here, except for the Eida bit, which we'll get to. So what's happening here? Like, what does it mean by this? How much longer will I still just be class rep to you? And I think it's about, basically, this is Sumire as a character to a certain degree, calling out as, am I part of the main character group, or am I just the class rep who happens to be around here? Like, we've been together because we've been placed in this kind of almost identical situation together. We have a lot of similarities. Are you basically saying that like we're not really friends anymore? That like you're the main character, you get to do all this stuff, but I always have to kind of, in a way, come out second best. And it does feel like there's a little bit of a sense of like where this goes from here in terms of Sarada's reaction to kind of getting called out like this, and then how Sumire will react to the fact that she's spoken up like this will, I think, be quite interesting for both of them. Because let's not forget how it started, like a few pages ago, that it was about fundamentally the idea of, it seems like Sumire is thinking a little bit more about the position that Boruto is in, and understanding that, hey, even though I really like him, I think I understand that in the crazy situation that's going on now, we shouldn't be around him. Like, we shouldn't be trying to team up with him, because we need to keep the freedom that we have of, we are free to support Boruto, but, you know, he can't be kind of free to just constantly be around us. And the more we're around him, the more we get linked together, and the less freedom we kind of have. Whereas Sarada is more, hey, we need to be a team again and join up on this, that sort of thing. Whereas there is the slight call out here of, hey, Boruto's more powerful than you. you're a liability to a certain degree if you are going to try and rush into the same situations he's trying to deal with. It's not said in as many words, but I think that's the angle that they're going for here, which I think is interesting, because that's sort of how it kind of came across, that Sarada is stronger now, but not where she needs to be to face the threats that we have. Admittedly, we still don't know what the Mangekyo Sharingan situation is with her, but we'll see what happens with this. At this point, Shikamaru kind of calls in Eida's head and is like, hey, I want to talk to you. There's then a one-page cutaway to, I guess this is the daimyo here, talking to the elders of the Leaf Village. Basically, this is just a follow-up on the idea of it's very bad that you let the criminal get away. Someone will pay for this in the future. Make sure you get him, effectively. That whole idea. So it seems to be sort of an idea that, again, there's some sort of a punishment coming for Shikamaru. There's a little bit of a web of lies he's weaving at this point, and it feels like at some point it's going to fall down, because we've already seen sort of like the Ino situation from a chapter or two ago didn't go maybe the best, and there's a bit of an interesting situation happening there. So is Shikamaru going to kind of like lose some of his privileges? Is he going to be taken out as the Hokage? We don't really know. But anyway, we cut to the Shikamaru Eida discussion, where quite a bit actually happens. We again address the idea that, Eida's abilities affect him, but we've already seen before that he's one of the characters who's mostly able to keep it in line around her and can actually just have a relatively normal conversation with her. So she confirms a few pieces of information to him. There is another Divine Tree character, his name is Ryu, modeled after Shinki, and his target is Gaara, of course. She also confirms that he knows the jutsu to free Gaara, so this prompts the need for Shikamaru to arrange a mission to go to the Sand, because they don't have this information and they need to basically protect Gaara, take down Ryu, because he's obviously going to want to go for Gaara, go for the target. Also, we get a very interesting thing here, which is that Eida has now taken to, she will only use her omnipotence to view what has been said amongst the Divine Tree characters when she looks at it as the past. She refuses any longer to look at these moments in present day, because when she looked, Mamushi, the bug Divine Tree character, looked at her like directly in the eye, and this is a bit of a unique situation for her, that someone is able to kind of like see her while she's using that technique, and she is, it says here, it made my blood run cold. So I don't know what he might have done if I'd kept watching. So they seem to be highlighting that he has some sort of ability where maybe it's because the target connection actually means something and he can sense that she's there, or he has some sort of a sensory ability that can actually see her while she's using her ability. So interesting, because that one is very underdeveloped. They have not really covered the situation with the significance of why is one of them based on bug, and but the target is Eida. Obviously, Demon's going to be involved in whatever fight happens there, but when, where, how is that one going to actually come about? And then saving Bug, is that even a priority for anyone? It's kind of like a bit of an interesting situation by itself. So yeah, she refuses to watch them in real time anymore, and Shikamaru just thanks her for all the information and is happy that she's even able to get kind of past events or any information. So that's interesting. She then is like, hey, you set up the situation that allowed Boruto to escape using Mitsuki, didn't you? He refuses to elaborate on that overall. And she just highlights that, hey, you can tell me. I won't tell on you to the village because I don't want to cause trouble for Boruto. And she thinks about the scene here, I just don't intend to reveal anything to you. I haven't told a single lie. She thinks about Boruto at this point, and obviously I think we're beginning to get a sense that I think maybe Eida likes Boruto as well. And obviously we haven't come back to this in a while, the idea that her previous love, the person apparently that she actually does love, is Kawaki, but it's the previous version of Kawaki before he kind of went off the rails. And now she's beginning to like Boruto maybe a little bit more, and we have to wait and see what exactly is going on here in this situation. But either way, she finds Boruto intriguing at the very least, is sort of the idea here. So she confirms that yes, Kawaki is going to work with Boruto going forward. They're going to, try and take down the Divine Tree characters together overall. Shikamaru then asks about the mystery accomplice. So it's Kashin Koji, and then he just says, "Hey, it's Kashin Koji, isn't it? Yeah." And she pause. A toad comes out from Eida's hair, and it's Kashin Koji talking to Shikamaru. So yes, you are correct, Shikamaru Nara. I'll give you the gist of this, but no questions, basically. So he basically just gives him some information. So obviously there's a decision made here to be like, okay, we will give you some future information that will help things go in the right direction here, but I'm not going to go crazy on this. So he's basically like, send Konohamaru, Sarada, and Mitsuki to the Land of Wind. So basically to the Sand Village. And he's like, either Ryu or Matsuri are bound to show up there, or maybe even both of them together. Have your trio team up with the two Sand Ninja to slay them. Which is a crazy statement, because I almost forgot here that going back to this part of the chapter, he already said it was a possibility that the two of them would show up, which everyone is shocked by in the final scene of the chapter. But he seems to believe that these 5 characters, so Konohamaru, Sarada, Mitsuki, Yodo, and Araya, I think is the other guy's name, these 5 characters are capable of taking down 2 Divine Tree characters. Interesting. Obviously, Sarada's full scope of her abilities is a little bit up in the air. Konohamaru probably is more impressive than maybe we've been led to believe. And he was decent, I think, in the last time we had a fight. Like, he did some cool stuff. So, maybe with lots of support and ambush, maybe something like this could work. And I suppose there's also the possibility that maybe Gaara gets freed. He can maybe temporarily join the fight depending on what his health condition is in. We don't fully know, but it seems a bit of a mismatch, honestly, but we'll see what happens. So, yeah, that's the situation here. There's like, make sure you get them on the mission, and don't let Uzumaki Himawari outside Konoha. Jura has set his eyes on her, and if she steps outside of Konoha, it may draw his notice and will result in her death. So, I don't know, is this confirmation that actually Jura's target is not Naruto? It was never Naruto, that the target for Jura is actually Himawari? Or is it just the situation that, oh, Himawari he's now interested in because she has the Tail Beast stuff? I still am a little bit confused on that, because everyone else seems to very clearly know the name of who they're after, whereas Jura, it's a bit of a weird one where, like, he's an individual, like, Divine Tree character. He's not based on anyone, so how does that change things? It's kind of weird. Maybe it is the Tail Beast connection. Maybe it is Himawari. Maybe Naruto's not relevant, but we'll see. I would keep in my mind the idea that that hasn't been super directly confirmed overall. He then says something quite interesting. Fortunately, Jura holds Konoha's cultural value in high esteem, and he himself is reluctant to wage battle within the village. So, barring any extreme circumstances, she should be safe for now as long as she stays within the village's boundaries. And notify everyone to treat him as any ordinary customer if Jura happens to pay a visit to a bookstore or some such. So, obviously, this is all from information about potential timelines. Kashin Koji has this information, which is that, hey, he cares about the culture of Konoha. He will likely come here just to get information on the village. He might go to the bookstore, get something like that. He won't be there to destroy it very specifically. He's just interested in it. And you need to make sure that you don't cause an incident, basically. Don't provoke him. If you anger him, truly anger him, we will have no chance of winning. Absolutely none. Which is very interesting what they mean by that. The idea that, like, wait, if he gets angry, he suddenly is unbeatable. But, like, how are we planning to defeat him then? That, like, what, like, if Boruto and Kawaki approach him and challenge him, he won't be angered at any point in that fight and he'll be beatable. It's a bit of an interesting dynamic there overall. Maybe it's because he is the actual, I guess, Ten Tails individuality, that there's some sense of, like, if you have that almost like beast-like rage come out, there's no stopping him. It'll be rampaging type situation overall. So yeah, the situation is basically to avoid Jura intervening, we'll hit the others with the minimum force required. And if he shows up, we'll retreat straight away. So that's fascinating just by itself, that Kakashi and Koji, and again, this is apparently confirmed by future timelines, there are situations where that group of 5 is capable of taking down these two, which is very interesting to me. The only logic I have behind that is maybe likely that these are maybe on the weaker end of the Divine Tree characters, that they're probably not as powerful as Hidari or Jura, because we have no clue for what the scope of, like, how powerful Moegi is, of course. And Shinki is powerful, but he's still, like, young and doesn't seem like he's maybe in the absolute upper range for shinobis just yet. So maybe it's potentially doable, depending on what we do, of course. And there's always the chance for other characters to join the fight and all this sort of stuff, depending on what we exactly do. But anyway, yeah. At this point, Kashin Koji basically leaves. He does thank him for helping with Boruto's escape, and just highlights that, hey, you followed your heart. You went against basically everything in proof of the truth, and you did what you believed was right. I will not coerce you. Keep following your heart to achieve a good future. And he bounces away. And Shikamaru's just like, what a bother. As Eida then switches her attention to basically check in on Sumire, because she hits on the line that was just said there, following your heart, follow your heart. And she thinks about Sumire, who's kind of following her heart to a certain degree. And she's thinking to herself, like, why did I bring that up? Like, what was I thinking? Like, the kind of, like, outburst to a certain degree. But then we immediately cut to, it's Konohamaru, it's Mitsuki, it's Sarada. They're in the land of wind. And Sarada's lost in thought, clearly about what has just happened. Mitsuki asks her if something is wrong. She says she's fine. And Konohamaru's just like, don't space out or the Sand Ninja will make fun of you. And this is where Yodo and Araya arrive. And they're like, hey, welcome to the Land of Wind. We appreciate your help. They go to the specific coordinates, basically, and they start looking around. And they're like, hey, where did Lord Eighth get this intel? And it's a reliable source, but, you know, dubious about it. Then we get an interesting, they just continue this on into the finale here of the chapter here as well. Yodo just goes up to Sarada and is just like, your aura's changed a lot. You into a guy? And Sarada's like, no. Not that it matters. And Mitsuki, it's Konohamaru who spots them, Divine Tree characters. And it is the two of them. It is Ryu and it is Matsuri. They're both there. They have found and killed one of Kashin Koji's toads, it looks like it. But our characters are mostly just concerned about the fact that there is two of them, and they are extremely worried about this. But the two Divine Tree characters are like, this is a clue that will lead to Boruto. So they're looking for Boruto, and I'm guessing that probably is the turning factor here. This group plus Boruto, while Kawaki deals with Amado. There we go. That suddenly feels a little bit better. That, yeah, Boruto is clearly powerful enough to be able to handle things, especially with some support from some very capable shinobi there. If Boruto gets involved in this fight, then absolutely, I think, yes, it is possible to actually win this one. So, interesting stuff to end the chapter there. They are clearly going for something here in that, is there any way within the next chapter or two we don't get down to some sort of a fight in some way? Maybe we'll be stealthily following these characters for a while, but inevitably they're going to probably at some point realize, hey, Gaara's just over there. I'm going to free him, consume him, and whatever happens there. Because again, we still don't know what exactly happens when one of these characters consumes their target. Are we actually ever going to see that, given who all the target characters are? I'm not really sure. But the significance behind why they wrote it in this way, to have both characters be here, is that, of course, Ryu is the sand-based character. We're in the sand village, basically. That makes a lot of sense. But Matsuri, her target is Konohamaru. And that's going to be a quite interesting one. And maybe it will allow us to properly explore this dynamic in terms of, like, obviously, Moegi and Konohamaru's relationship is that they were both kind of like teammates, of course. But there's almost potentially an implication in who each character has chosen, is that it is someone who is deeply important to that person. So, you know, we'll see what they address there, and if they cover more on what exactly the target situation is with these characters. But still, I think it's a cool place to end the story in, where Boruto is, I think, now clearly positioned of like, okay, they basically are telling us at this point, Boruto is not just going to be hanging out with the good guy characters because he risks leaking too much information and turning too many people into singularities, where it kind of locks their fate down to specific paths. So he's just going to be basically appearing when he needs to, backing away until the Divine Tree character crisis is dealt with. And I think that's a really good thing to know for his character, that this is why he can't just hang around. That was a very important thing, I think, to get across overall. So I think that's going to be pretty important overall. But yeah, how fast are we going to get into the action, given that, again, probably next chapter we do have to have Kawaki confront Amado, get his limiter undone, address a lot of that situation. Is the Akebi situation going to come up on that side of things as well? And then also, like, you know, they did address Himawari here, but it was just like, hey, don't send her on missions, basically. Keep her in the village, that will keep her safe. That's interesting. There's still a few lingering things of like, hey, remember last chapter, like they told Konohamaru, like, hey, don't tell Tamari what happened with Gaara, so she could maybe arrive on the scene. Maybe Moegi's team, Inoshikacho, maybe they turn up at some point. But I have to say, I do honestly find what they did with Sarada and Sumire to be kind of interesting. And I do think it is actually more than just, oh, it's the girls talking about romance. I think that is actually going to help both of them as characters. Again, depending on the execution, depending on what exactly we are doing here. Because they're basically saying that we can't actually do anything with Boruto's relationship with either of these two characters until we pretty much get to the end of the series, more or less. So it does feel like it's mostly like an issue between Sarada and Sumire that they have to sort out amongst themselves. And that it mostly is actually Sarada having to assess, like, hey, am I not treating Sumire in the right way as a friend type thing. But anyway, they're my thoughts on the chapter. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this one. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.